YouTuber and Twitch personality Dylan Burns runs a podcast called the Hippy Dippy Podcast. This last week, he had a podcast championship match between Vaush and Bastiat, two political commentators on YouTube and Twitch. During the debate, the topic of coercion came up. There was a lot of disagreement from both sides, and it got a little heated.
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm letting you dictate the conversation a little bit too much. Hold on, Bastiat, just a moment. Very kindly.
You dictated the conversation by bringing up Coconut Island and sex and rape while we were talking about the more salient point that you...
The problem, Bastiat, is you legitimately...
There was a bunch of examples thrown around, two main ones, one about coconuts on an island, and another one about a homeless man being offered to suck some dick. It was a very interesting discussion for me, and I wanted to know the core of this problem and what coercion actually is, as well as the implications of the arguments that each player was making. Let's start with the Coconut Island scenario. So imagine this. You're flying on a plane, it crashes onto an island, you wake up, and what you realize is that one of the passengers on the plane woke up before you and has hoarded all of the food on the island. Now, this person walks up to you and says, "Hey, I will give you some of this food so long as you suck my dick." Is this coercion? Well, coercion is defined as the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. So the core of the problem is this question: are you being forced to suck this person's dick? Well, assuming that there are no other methods of getting food on this island, so you can't go fishing, you can't hunt a wild boar, there is no other way of getting food. The only food that you could eat is that within the possession of this other person. So, if hunger is a force, then you are being forced to suck this person's dick. So, is hunger a force? Well, force is defined as coercion or compulsion, especially with the use or threat of violence. So if hunger is a compulsion with a threat, then by definition, hunger is a force. Now, hunger is defined as a feeling of discomfort or weakness caused by lack of food, coupled with the desire to eat. My main argument is outlined here. So desire and compulsion within the definition of hunger are synonymous. So I could say a feeling of discomfort or weakness caused by lack of food, coupled with the desire or with the compulsion to eat. A feeling of discomfort or weakness can be considered violence in different definitions, but violence in general is some harm upon someone's body. If we don't eat, then obviously we die, and death is easily considered violence. Therefore, from these three facts, hunger is a compulsion with a threat. Therefore, hunger is a force. Therefore, you are, in this scenario, being forced to suck this person's dick. Therefore, this is coercion. So let's pull it back here for a moment. So, you land on an island, someone hoards all the food, there's no other way to get food, that's an important assumption here, and this person says, "Hey, you gotta suck my dick if you want any food." This is, by definition, assuming everything that I said is true, coercion. So in conclusion, in this example, it is coercion to ask someone to suck your dick for food if that person cannot get any food any other way. But it still requires a force, and that's important. Coercion always requires some force or threat of violence. The next example that came up was you walking up to a homeless person and then saying, "Hey, I'll pay you $100 to suck my dick." Is this coercion? Again, we come to the primary question here. Is the homeless person being forced to suck your dick? We cannot make the same assumption that we did before, which was that on the island, we can assume that there's no other way to get food. Can we assume that this homeless individual has no other way of getting food? We can't make that assumption. We don't know. So let's look a little further into this problem. Therefore, we run into a logical condition that looks like this. If the person's need for this money is a force and the person has no other way of obtaining money, then this man is being forced to suck your dick, and by conclusion, this is coercion. Clearly, there is some ambiguity here. Can we say with certainty that this man needs this money? So the definition of need is require something because it is essential or very important. So the logical argument that follows, if money is essential or very important, then this person needs this money. At this point, a conclusion might seem obvious for many, but before making this conclusion, we must recognize still that there is a lot of ambiguity as to the essentialness of money. This is not as simple as the coconut problem, as there are many more variables at play here. Essentially what has happened is the core problem has shifted from, are we forcing this person to suck our dick, to, When can we determine that money is essential or very important for this person? If we determine that yes, money is essential and very important, then we are forcing this person to suck our dick, and by definition, this is coercion. If not, if this money is not essential or very important for this person, then we are not forcing this person to suck our dick. This is not coercion. So let's go through some hypotheticals to just think about the problem a little bit more. So hypothetical number 1. The person objectively has no money, no food, no shelter, and cannot speak. This person has nothing but the clothes on their back. The person knows very little sign language. This person is a person of color. This person has some disability that prevents them from doing most labor. There are no public or private institutions in this city that help the homeless. Common stigma around homelessness pushes people to avoid helping the homeless in this city. The argument here that would follow is that this person has no other way of obtaining money. Money is the only way this individual can obtain essential needs. Therefore, this person needs this money. Therefore, this person is being forced to suck your dick. Therefore, this is coercion. Hypothetical number 2. The person already has $40 in their wallet. This person already has a meal's worth of food. This person has a sleeping bag and some other useful belongings. The city you live in has a homeless shelter nearby. They are able-bodied and have few to no problems with mental illness. They present as a cis man. They are white. There are work programs funded by the city that actively reach out to the homeless population. Residents of this city often give food and money to the homeless population. The argument that follows is this person has several alternative methods of obtaining money. There are other ways to obtain essential needs besides giving this person money. This person already has food and a possible location for shelter. Therefore, this person does not need this money. Therefore, this person is not being forced to suck your dick. Therefore, this is not coercion. Okay, so it's 1 a.m. and I'm editing this clip, and I realize that I really, really hate Vaush for bringing up homeless people and sucking dicks as the example, because now I have to fucking go back and try and make this sound not shitty. It sounds terrible to say that this man doesn't need the money, but remember, we're focused precisely on the transaction that was described previously. So the $100 for the fellatio. If the homeless man rejects this deal, then no direct or even indirect consequences happen. He still exists in a way that is still homelessness, but it's no worse than it was previously. Whereas in the previous hypothetical, if the individual did not accept the deal, then they would experience violence in the form of hunger or exposure. In conclusion, we realize that what is coercion and what is not coercion is not some binary statement. It is instead a function. We can say that if the function is defined as f of x, x being the variable, the thing that's changing, where f of x is how coercive this interaction is. That is to say that coercion is not a binary state. Coercion is instead derived from two factors: the ratio of the essentialness of one's needs, something that is a threat/violence if not maintained, to the amount offered. So, for example, offering a pile of dirt in exchange for a blowjob is not coercive in this context, because to argue that the pile of dirt is essential for the homeless person would, by common standards, be absurd. But someone could threaten a homeless person to suck their dick for a pile of dirt, and now this is coercion. So let's tie this back to the debate. Within the debate between Vaush and Bastiat, they were discussing global trade. The specific point of this argument is to determine if any individual trade is considered coercion. Specifically, this is to say whether this trade is morally wrong and therefore should not be happening, which is Vaush's point, when a larger country is enacting some trade agreement with a smaller country. From the above analysis, we can now start to understand how to define the coerciveness of the trade and what it requires from us. Given that coercion is not simply a binary, but is instead a function of the essentialness and threat presented, then we must get into the specific details of the trade agreement and the details of each country. Thus, given some country A and some country B, we must consider the difference in the capabilities and opportunities between A and B, the current economic options that the receiving country has in terms of economic growth/trade, the essentialness of this trade agreement for both A and B, any force or threat imposed upon either country by the other if the trade is accepted or not accepted. Finally, my personal take on the arguments presented, and then my own thoughts. Vaush's argument. So Vaush is making a moral claim about if larger countries should take advantage, through coercion, of smaller countries with trade agreements. His claim is that no, this should not be happening. Specifically, he believes that these larger countries are leveraging their power to unfairly use smaller countries for labor, resources, and power through these coercive trading agreements, and thus these agreements are immoral. Vaush also supports isolationism as a way of protecting and strengthening these smaller countries from what he sees as immoral trade agreements made coercively by larger countries. In his own words, he wants smaller countries to have independence, like the USA, where we have a lot of power to engage in trade relationships on our own terms because we are an incredibly powerful and wealthy country. Essentially what he's saying is larger countries are coercing smaller countries into shitty trade agreements. The larger countries take advantage of the small country, and therefore this should not be happening. Smaller countries should also have more power and independence to stop these shitty trade agreements, and therefore smaller countries should be more isolationist. Bastiat's argument. Bastiat makes the claim that there is a difference between trade and coercion. He mentions mutual benefit as one of the reasons that trade agreements are not necessarily coercion. In particular, he mentions that although we often think of trade with the third world, in particular labor, as us taking advantage of these countries, the reality in many cases is that foreign investment provides jobs and benefits to these countries that might in many cases be greater than the local economy is capable of producing. Bastiat feels that open trade with other countries is good for both parties. He claims many factors, including political relations and global/local economics for both countries. He claims that more global trade is in general a good thing for the world. Long story short, Bastiat is saying that larger countries are not coercing smaller countries into shitty trade agreements. Instead, trade agreements help smaller countries by developing their local economies and political relations. Along with this, he argues that both countries are benefiting, therefore it is not necessarily coercion. From these 2 points, Bastiat concludes that global trade is a good thing and should be encouraged, even between large and small countries. My problems with Vaush's argument. Vaush's arguments are mostly moral. Moral arguments are useful because they give us a direction. This shouldn't be happening, or smaller countries should be more isolationist, but they fail in providing us with solutions. This is where I think Vaush's argument falls apart the most. If we do the work to determine that some trade agreement is coercive by the previous analysis presented and therefore immoral, what can we do to stop it? At what coercive amount do we determine that we should stop the trade? This is not to say that there isn't some moral imperative to stop it, but what if we can't, or it's really difficult to determine just how coercive the trade agreement is? Furthermore, if we do somehow stop this trade agreement, are there harms now being placed upon the smaller country? Or what about in the case where specific parts of the smaller country are largely benefiting by the trade agreement, but other parts are being harmed or coerced into going along with it? Is this harm greater or less than the benefit of ending or allowing this trade agreement? These are all questions that you shouldn't be quick to answer. The point here is that the answer is really difficult to determine, even with very specific considerations. Does that mean we shouldn't consider the morals in this problem? No. It simply means it might be too difficult to get a good answer, and therefore we should see if there are other solutions that are easier or more efficient at pushing us towards whatever moral end we're trying to achieve. Vaush's argument about isolationism may have some legitimacy, as it could be possible that there are smaller countries which could implement isolationist policies until they reach a certain economic viability or independence in order to lower the apparent coercive effects of trading with a larger power. But we must consider at what cost this comes with. Trade isn't just about economics, it's also about political relations and having a say in global happenings. If a country is to completely isolate from a significant portion of the global economy, I would imagine this country would greatly lessen the number of strategies it has politically and economically. Should some global event occur, or let's say a neighboring country does something nefarious, this now isolated country has far less tools and allies to help in this situation, not to mention the obvious reduction to external and internal economic stimulation. My problems with Bastiat's argument. It is entirely possible that there are harmful trade agreements that exist between large and small countries today. In particular, these trade agreements could directly harm the smaller country in a way that prevents them from growing or developing overall. Given that coercion could be occurring here, there is room for some moral consideration to be had. Should we do something to stop this? Should trade be taking place in such an abusive manner? Do the benefits really outweigh the costs in all situations? The answers here are also very difficult to determine. Again, does that mean we shouldn't consider the morals in this problem? No. Again, it simply means it might be too difficult to get a good answer, and therefore, we should see if there are other solutions that are easier or more efficient at pushing us towards whatever moral end we're trying to achieve. My personal conclusion. Although Bastiat's take does carry with it some moral statements, it is reflective of the current reality we live within. That is to say that Bastiat's take has a solution baked into it. We can continue global trade as it is. The problem with this is that there could very well be a moral imperative to stop some trade agreements that are very coercive and unfair. It just takes a lot of effort to determine which ones these are. I personally believe that the benefits of furthering global trade far outweigh the moral imperative. I'm speaking from the perspective of a middle-class individual living in a first-world country that could very well be taking advantage of smaller countries in unfair ways. but from my understanding, furthering global trade pushes the world towards common values and accountability that can then be used to further my own moral imperatives: global equality, global opportunity, resources for all, etc., much more efficiently than Vaush's proposed solution, or lack thereof. Certainly, there will be people and countries being taken advantage of, but that is unfortunately the reality we currently have. In summary, I fundamentally believe that trade between countries is almost always beneficial to humanity for the following reasons: increased economic stimulation for one or both parties, increased accountability between countries and providing an incentive for nice interactions between countries, further globalization provides a common value or goal if both parties are benefiting. Alright, well, that's all I've got for today. So what do you think? Is global trade in some circumstances coercion, or is it simply trade? Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.